If you'll remember last week, we began to talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and why it applies to your office, your practice, and you right now. We also talked about which patients that come into your practice are really impacted, and do you have to provide additional accommodations for? And so we covered a lot of those issues last week. This week, I want to talk to you about some of the physical attributes in your office and what you have to do to accommodate. Now, you're wondering why I'm wearing a Nebraska Cornhusker shirt. It's because I'm a pretty big Nebraska Cornhusker fan, and we're playing Northwestern this weekend, so I'm wearing it for myself. Hopefully, Dr. Pinkney is also wearing his, and we can support Nebraska in this time. But anyway, really, what I want to cover is all of this ADA stuff, and I want to make sure it's abundantly clear what you have to do in your practice. Very, very important. I want you to hear me, that it doesn't matter whether or not you're doing a remodel project in your practice or you're doing a new construction. I'm actually not going to deal with the requirements in those particular situations. In those situations, actually, the ADA's put out a lengthy 15-page document that has circumferences and areas and widths and everything that you have to abide by in those conditions. And so I would suggest if you're going through a remodel or a construction project that you get with your general contractor and review that document to make sure you've covered all of your ADA requirements, because you remember the ADA applies to your office. That is very important. So now what else? Now, what do you have to do? Well, the ADA actually requires that you remove barriers to care when they are, and this is a quote, readily achievable. In other words, what is right now something simple that you can do in your practice that's readily achievable, that would help accommodate and make accommodations for those with disabilities? Remember, we covered those with disabilities and who they would be in your practice. We covered those in last week's video. So all of these things are actually incredibly important. Here's what it means. In some of these cases, it's going to be simple. Maybe you just move some furniture. In some of the cases, it's actually going to require some construction. Even if you're not doing a remodel project, they consider some removal of these barriers that are readily available to require some work. And so what are some of the examples that they gave for a physician office that they would consider to be readily achievable actions to take for accommodation? Include installing ramps, making curb cutouts and sidewalks and entrances, rearranging your furniture. That's the simple one, right? Widening doorways, there's your construction. So they consider widening doorways to be a readily achievable action that you should be taking in your practice. Installing offset hinges to widen your doorways, installing accessible door hardware, installing grab bars in your toilet stalls, rearranging the toilet partitions to increase maneuvering space, insulating lavatory pipes underneath the sinks to prevent berms, installing a raised toilet seat, installing a full-length bathroom mirror, repositioning the paper towel dispenser in a bathroom in order to would be handicap accessible, creating designated accessible parking spaces, which you probably are already required to do anyway, installing accessible paper cup dispensers in an existing inaccessible water fountain, or even a water station, if you will. Removing high pile carpet and replacing it with low density carpeting, and more. These are just the examples that they gave. Basically, you need to take a look at your office and see what can you do to make sure that you're able to meet the accommodations for those with disabilities that could be coming into your practice. And remember, it doesn't matter if they do come in, you still are a covered entity under the ADA because you're just simply a place of public business, right? And so that's incredibly important. So now, are there some factors that could be considered in this whole process that would exempt you from doing these things? Well, maybe, and it's a big maybe. At the end of the day, it really only matters what the court determines, but what are some of the factors that could be included? The overall cost of a project, and potentially the financial resources that you have available, right? So both of those would be considerations that the courts would take into account, both in the civil and the governmental side of things, when dealing with an ADA, if you will, violation, for lack of a better way of putting it. If it's just, it seems like it should be readily achievable, but really, widening that doorway would be impossible because the walls that may be immediately attached to it are supporting walls or something along those lines. that may make it cost prohibitive for almost anybody. And they may change and say, maybe not that particular piece being readily available. But at the same time, that doesn't, or readily achievable, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily preclude it if it wouldn't be cost prohibitive to go ahead and make those changes. So you have to be very careful on exercising that or just assuming that, that costs too much money. In addition, if you were to decide to go ahead and say, yeah, I think it does, I really don't think that I can meet that particular requirement. It's just too expensive, and I don't necessarily have the financial resources to be able to make the appropriate accommodations. What did they say? Well, actually, there's an FAQ on these subjects, and the question was, well, what if I'm not able to remove the barriers at this time due to my financial situation? Does that mean that I'm relieved of current responsibilities? And their answer is no. And then they go on to say, when you can actually demonstrate that it's just cost prohibitive, there's just no way to make this happen. And this is key. They say, and I'm going to quote it, you must make your goods and services available through alternative methods if undertaking such methods is readily achievable. In other words, if you can't exercise readily achievable results in your physical practice, then you have to find ways to accommodate outside of that practice. Now, the examples they gave are more retail position stances and examples, such as delivering their food to them at the curb, or possibly even delivering their food to them at home. So then the question is how does all of that apply to a chiropractic physician office in these particular cases? And remember, you can't just refuse to help someone because you can't meet their ADA requirements, or because they're disabled. That would actually be a direct violation of the ADA in and of itself. And so the question is, how can you deliver those services and still meet the requirements of the ADA as they've laid out and as they've defined in a lot of their rules and in their FAQs that give us clearer definition? So please be aware that all of these things apply, that you have to make these readily achievable progressions, if you will, in your practice. And here's the thing, and I want to make sure this is really clear. If you just seem overwhelmed, you're like, I can't get all of this done. There's no way I can meet all of these things. Your best step is to do something. Begin to take the steps. Don't say, well, I haven't done anything for 5 years and I'm okay. That's not how it works. Take on a project this year. Take on another project next year. Maybe if finances allow, then take on yet another one. I mean, there's some of these things that you can do immediately and it won't impact you at all. I mean, rearranging your furniture to make sure that you're accessible and meet all of the requirements. That's an easy step to take, right? And the next one is maybe begin to take steps in your bathroom to begin to shift and change out, to make your bathrooms more handicap accessible. By raising the toilet seat or putting in a full-length mirror. Some of the things are a little less expensive. Lower that paper towel dispenser, whatever the case might be. Begin to take the steps that are reasonable. But because if you take no steps, then it will be indefensible. But if you're taking steps, at least helps you and aids you in the process, both in the civil liability region and area, as well as the governmental side of things. Now, it may not be all you need, but at least it's something that you can take to the table in those particular cases. Next week, we're going to talk about what you're required to provide for people to come in your office, for your patients that come in that have needs under the ADA. And then the following week, we're going to talk about enforcement and what this looks like both from a governmental and a civil liability standpoint. So just be prepared. We'll cover these in the coming weeks, and go Cornhuskers. Take care.